On August 9th and 10th, 2026, a man who has not been seen in public since he became the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran issued a series of decrees. Mujtaba Khamenei, son of the man the United States killed on February 28th, commanding from an undisclosed location for 5.5 months, formally reshaped the military command structure of the country his father built, and that his father's enemies have been systematically dismantling since the night the bombs fell on Tehran. 6 appointments. A new chief of staff of the armed forces, a new deputy, a formal elevation of the man who has been running the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in everything but title since the war began, a new IRGC Navy commander, a new Basiji chief, and on August 9th, the day before those 6 military decrees, the appointment of Mohsen Rezai, a former IRGC commander-in-chief and 4-time presidential candidate, to lead the Supreme National Security Council, the body that oversees Iran's highest strategic and nuclear decisions. 8 decrees in 48 hours. From a supreme leader nobody has seen, issued in a country that has been absorbing American and Israeli strikes for 5.5 months, whose oil lifeline is cut, whose naval vessels are mostly sunk, whose missile storage has been systematically destroyed, and whose previous military command was either killed by American bombs on the first day of the war or has been running the institution in a state of wartime emergency ever since. The title PURGE requires some precision before it can be applied to what Iran just did, because the two processes are related but not identical. The United States did not force Iran to remove its generals through political pressure. It forced a reshuffle by killing them. On February 28th, the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury targeted Iranian military and political leadership with a directness that had not been seen in American doctrine since the earliest days of the Iraq invasion in 2003. The defense minister who would have been overseeing Iran's response to the war, Aziz Nasirzadeh, was killed in an airstrike on that same day. Multiple IRGC commanders died in the opening hours. Ali Larijani, who had served as Iran's SNSC secretary and as the Supreme National Security Council's representative in sensitive positions since the early years of the Islamic Republic, was killed in an Israeli strike in March 2026. The people who died on February 28th and in the subsequent weeks of the war did not choose to leave their positions. They were removed by precision munitions, and the institutions they led had to be rebuilt, restaffed, and restructured under active combat conditions by whoever survived. What Mujtaba Khamenei has now done in the decrees of August 9th and 10 is not the beginning of a leadership reshuffle. It is the formal conclusion of one that American bombs started on the first night of the war. The most important of the 6 military appointments, and the one that tells you the most about where the Islamic Republic's power center now sits, is the formal elevation of Ahmad Vahidi to Major General and Commander-in-Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Vahidi has been, by every credible account, the dominant institutional force in Iranian decision-making throughout this entire war. The Wall Street Journal documented, in reporting published in June 2026, that Vahidi had been repeatedly and successfully overruling President Pezeshkian and Foreign Minister Aragchi on diplomatic and military questions since the war began. His position before the August 10th decree was IRGC Commander-in-Chief in practice, but not in formal title. The decree makes it official, promotes him 1 rank, and signals clearly that the institution which has been overruling the civilian government has now been formally elevated to the position of direct command in the name of the supreme leader whose decrees are issued from an undisclosed location. Who Ahmad Vahidi is, beyond his role in the Iran war, is a fact that the Breitbart analysis of the appointment correctly placed at the center of understanding what his elevation means. Vahidi is wanted by Interpol. He has been on the Interpol Red Notice list for his alleged role in the 1994 bombing of the Asociación Mutual Israelita Argentina, the MIA Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. The bombing killed 85 people and wounded more than 300. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in the Western Hemisphere's history prior to September 11, 2001. Argentine prosecutors issued an arrest warrant for Vahidi in 1999 and have been seeking his extradition ever since. Vahidi served as Iranian defense minister from 2009 to 2013, during which time Argentina formally requested his extradition and Iran refused. His name has been associated with the AMIA attack in every public forum in which his name appears outside Iran since the mid-1990s. He has never stood trial. When he was at the funeral of the supreme leader in July, in a black baseball cap, making his first public appearance since the war began, he is now the formal commander-in-chief of the most powerful military political institution in the Iranian state, promoted by decree from a supreme leader who has not been seen in public since he took office, while the country is at war with the United States and Israel, and while Oman is trying to broker a ceasefire that the institution Vahidi commands has spent 5 months systematically violating. The appointment makes the negotiating challenge more explicit than it was before August 10th. The man who is formerly in command of the institution that keeps attacking tankers in the Strait of Hormuz is wanted by Interpol for a mass killing in South America. The 5 other appointments fill in the rest of the command structure with people whose profiles share a consistent theme. Military careers built inside the IRGC, or the regular armed forces at their most ideologically defined, with mandates that explicitly reference offensive operations rather than defensive management. Ali Abdullahi, named as the new Chief of Staff of Iran's armed forces, previously commanded the Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, which is the IRGC's main operational command for coordinating military activities inside Iran itself. He served as IRGC Ground Forces Commander, as Deputy of the IRGC Aerospace Force, and in a range of civilian security roles including provincial governor positions. His dual profile, military commander and civilian administrator with security functions, is the profile of an officer who has operated at the intersection of the IRGC's military and political roles throughout his career. Mustafa Azadi, named IRGC Deputy Commander, is a senior IRGC figure whose public statements throughout the war have been among the most hawkish on the question of confrontation with the United States. Ali Azmai, as IRGC Navy Commander, takes over the institution most directly responsible for the tanker attacks in the Strait of Hormuz that have been the primary trigger for every round of American retaliation since the war began. The appointment of a new Navy commander with the IRGC Navy's current operational mandate, which explicitly includes harassing commercial shipping and enforcing the Persian Gulf Strait Authority's permit system, is a statement about how that mission will continue under new leadership. Hossein Taib, as head of the Basij, brings back to an active position a former chief of the IRGC's intelligence organization, the man who previously oversaw the domestic surveillance and suppression apparatus before being removed in 2022. His return to a major command position signals the expanded domestic intelligence mandate that the decrees explicitly reference. The Mohsen Rezaei appointment to the Supreme National Security Council, announced the day before the military decrees, is the hinge that connects the military reshuffle to the diplomatic situation. The SNSC is the body that oversees Iran's nuclear program, its strategic decisions about war and peace, and the highest level security coordination between the military, the government, and the supreme leader. Its previous secretary after Larijani's death, Mohammad Bakir Zolkadr, had been associated with the IRGC, but was regarded as more technocratic than ideologically defined. Rezaei is neither technocratic nor underdefined. He was the IRGC's commander-in-chief from 1981 to 1997, the longest tenure in that position in the institution's history. He ran for president 4 times and lost each time. In his public statements, he has been consistently among the most hardline voices on the question of confrontation with the United States and on the nuclear program. He is, in the words of the Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty Analysis, published the same day as his appointment, a hardline IRGC veteran and, in the assessment of some Iranian observers, a figure whose previous positions on diplomacy have been so absolute that his appointment to the SNSC is being read as a message about the direction of Iran's strategic posture rather than as a neutral administrative appointment. The analysis in RFRL's report is direct. The appointment exposed a rift dating back to the ceasefire deal. The hardliner faction inside Iran is reading the entire reshuffle as proof that Mojtaba Khamenei was never genuinely in favor of the MOU framework, that the negotiating team around IRGC and Ghalibaf exceeded their mandate when they signed the agreement at Versailles in June, and that the new military structure represents a repudiation of the diplomatic track in favor of a confrontational posture. Whether that interpretation is accurate is genuinely contested, and the RFRL analysis was careful to note that reformist political analyst Ahmad Zaidabadi took a more guarded view, declining to offer a clean interpretation of the reshuffle's direction. The competing reading, available in the Iran International and Palestine Chronicle reporting on the appointments, is that the reshuffle is a consolidation of wartime command rather than a rejection of diplomacy, and that elevating Vahidi formally while keeping IRGC and Pezeshkian in their positions preserves the dual-track structure, military hardliner pressure and civilian diplomatic engagement, that has been Iran's operational posture throughout the conflict. On this reading, the decrees announced to the United States not that Iran has chosen war over peace, but that any peace will be negotiated from a position where the IRGC's formal command is explicitly strengthened, and that the IRGC's formal commander is a man wanted by Interpol who has been tasked with developing readiness for powerful offensive operations against the enemy. Those are not mutually exclusive positions. An institution can simultaneously prepare for offensive operations and remain open to negotiation. Iran has been doing exactly that, in alternating cycles of tanker strikes and diplomatic openings for 5 months. The mandates attached to the decrees are the clearest available indication of what Mojtaba Khamenei intends the new command structure to accomplish. Vahidi, per the Palestine Chronicle account, was specifically tasked with developing the IRGC's readiness for powerful offensive operations against the enemy. The decrees collectively call for stronger deterrence, readiness for powerful offensive operations, and an expanded domestic intelligence network. The phrase powerful offensive operations appears in a formal presidential decree issued by the Supreme Leader on the same day that Iranian and Omani negotiators were reportedly finalizing the coordinates of a proposed shipping route through Hormuz. The deliberate sequencing, as Dr. Omar Mohammed of George Washington University's Anti-Semitism Research Initiative told Fox News Digital, was intentional. The decrees were issued in English on X for an international audience, while diplomatic talks were ongoing. The message is a layered one. Iran is negotiating while simultaneously building the command structure for a deeper confrontation, and the world should understand that the negotiating team is not speaking for the institution that has been approved for powerful offensive operations. The parallel between what happened inside the Iranian military and what happened inside the American military is one of the most instructive features of this war for anyone trying to understand where both sides are heading. On April 4th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth fired General Randy George, the Army's top officer, along with 2 other senior generals. In what military? COM described as one of the most significant wartime leadership shakeups during active U.S. combat operations in recent years. Hegseth also removed General David Hodden, who leads Army Training and Doctrine Command, and Major General William Green, Jr., the Army's chief of chaplains. This followed a broader purge throughout the Trump administration's term, but more than a dozen high-ranking officers dismissed, the top lawyers for the Army, Navy, and Air Force fired, generals deemed insufficiently aligned with the administration's vision replaced by those considered more politically reliable. The Christian Science Monitor observed that the timing, against the backdrop of an active war with Iran, raised questions about how Hegseth handles military advice that runs counter to his wishes on the war front, specifically in the context of generals who had been raising concerns about the pace of escalation and the munitions stockpile. Both sides, in other words, have spent the months of this war removing military leaders whose advice created friction and replacing them with leaders whose posture aligns with the commanding civilian authority. In Iran's case, the civilians doing the appointing are a supreme leader who has not been seen in public and an IRGC institutional leadership whose preferred outcome has consistently been confrontation over compromise. In America's case, the civilian doing the firing is a defense secretary who responded to concerns about the munitions stockpile by dismissing the Army chief, who raised them, and who described the solution to the shortage as building more, faster, without explaining how the production timeline for Patriot interceptors, which runs over 2 years per unit, accommodates that ambition. Both militaries have gone through their leadership reshuffles under active combat conditions. Both have moved toward more ideologically defined commanders and away from the institutionalist voices who raised structural concerns. Both have done so in ways that have raised questions among the analysts and former officials watching from outside about whether the command structures that emerge will be better at fighting and worse at stopping. The decrees of August 9 and 10 are not the end of something. They are the consolidation of a power dynamic inside the Islamic Republic that has been visible since before the Islamabad MOU was signed in June. The IRGC is the dominant institution, Vahidi is the dominant figure within it, and Mujtaba Khamenei's decrees, issued from undisclosed locations in formal language published in English on X for international consumption, have now made all of that official. The 6 appointments fill positions that the war created vacancies in. The mandates attached to those appointments describe a direction: more intelligence capacity domestically, stronger deterrence externally, and readiness for powerful offensive operations. Whether those offensive operations materialize, or whether the Oman talks produce a ceasefire before the new command structure has an opportunity to demonstrate its mandate, is the question that the decrees have now placed at the center of the next phase of this conflict. The man formally in charge of executing them is wanted by Interpol. The institution he commands has been attacking tankers in the Strait of Hormuz in violation of a ceasefire its own government signed. The supreme leader who appointed him has not been seen since he took power. And the United States, which killed the generals that made these appointments necessary, is now requiring compensation as a condition for the talks that might prevent their successors from being used. There is a deeper history to Vahidi's appointment that deserves more than a single reference, because the Buenos Aires bombing is not a footnote to his career. It is the event that has defined his public identity outside Iran for 30 years, and that identity is now the formal face of the IRGC. The MIA bombing on July 18, 1994, was a truck bomb detonated inside the headquarters of the largest Jewish community organization in Argentina, in a residential neighborhood of Buenos Aires at 10 in the morning. The explosion collapsed the 7-story building onto itself, killing 85 people and injuring more than 300. It remained the deadliest attack on Jews anywhere in the world since the Holocaust until October 7, 2023. Argentine investigators, including Judge Juan José Galeano and later Special Prosecutor Alberto Nisman, spent years building a case that the operation was planned by a committee of senior Iranian officials that included Vahidi, who was then serving as the commander of the Quds Force. Nisman was found dead in his apartment in January 2015, the night before he was scheduled to present charges that then-President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner had helped cover up Iran's role. The circumstances of Nisman's death were never resolved to the satisfaction of Argentine prosecutors, who continue to regard his death as a homicide. The Interpol Red Notice on Vahidi has been in effect since 1999. He was already serving as Iran's defense minister when Argentina formally requested his extradition in 2009, and Iran refused. He has been operating inside Iranian government structures, including positions directly responsible for Iranian foreign intelligence and military operations, for the entire period since the warrant was issued. The decrees that make him the formal IRGC commander-in-chief are therefore not appointing someone with an obscure or contested past. They are appointing someone whose name has been on an international arrest warrant for 27 years, for a bombing that killed 85 people, at a moment when Iran is trying to negotiate a ceasefire with the United States, and while Iranian and Omani officials are reportedly finalizing coordinates for a shipping arrangement through Hormuz. The deliberate sequencing that Dr. Mohammed described the decrees issued in English on X while diplomatic talks were ongoing reads differently once you know who Vahidi is. It is Iran's new supreme leader announcing, in the most explicit possible terms available to someone who will not appear in public, that the institutional command of the Islamic Republic is now formally in the hands of someone the international legal community has been trying to extradite for nearly 3 decades, and that this is the man who has been tasked with developing readiness for powerful offensive operations against the enemy. Whether that is a negotiating posture designed to extract maximum leverage or a genuine statement of strategic direction, only the institution that issued the decrees fully knows. What is not in doubt is that the decrees were written to be read by Washington, that they were published in English for that purpose, and that the figure at their center has carried an Interpol Red Notice since the Clinton administration. The Iran International reporting added one more dimension that illuminates the internal struggle the reshuffle represents. President Pezeshkian, whose government signed the Islamabad MOU and whose foreign minister has been the most visible proponent of the negotiated track, has been trying since before the MOU was signed to appoint a permanent intelligence minister. The Intelligence Ministry, which handles domestic security and foreign intelligence separately from the IRGC's own intelligence arm, was operating without a confirmed permanent minister throughout the most intense phase of the diplomatic activity. Iran International reported that Pezeshkian's efforts to fill that post had run into resistance from Vahidi and the IRGC leadership. The Intelligence Minister is a cabinet position requiring parliamentary confirmation, which means the IRGC cannot simply block it by decree. What it can do is create enough friction and resistance that the appointment process stalls. A civilian president who cannot appoint his own intelligence minister, because the IRGC commander-in-chief objects is a civilian president who does not fully control his own government security apparatus. That is what the Vahidi appointment and the intelligence ministry vacancy together describe, in the language of institutional bureaucracy rather than the language of tanks in the streets. The August 10th decrees have landed in Washington at a moment when the administration's position on talks is visibly hardening. Trump's new compensation demand, announced the same day as the Iranian military reshuffle, is either a response to the reshuffle itself or an independent escalation that arrived by coincidence at the most complicated possible moment. If it is a response, it suggests the administration reads the Vahidi appointment and the Rezaiei SNSC appointment as a closing of the diplomatic window and is responding accordingly. If it is an independent escalation, the timing means the two moves, an Iranian reshuffle toward hardliners and an American demand for compensation, arrived in the same news cycle and reinforced each other's most damaging interpretations. The Oman talks that Reuters described as progressing toward a deal expected soon on August 8th. Now exist in a context in which Iran has formally elevated its hardline military commander, while the United States has added a new precondition to engagement. That is not the context in which deals close. It is the context in which both sides step back from the table while insisting they are still at it. What both sides' general reshuffles share, when you put them alongside each other, is the specific character of wartime institutional adaptation that always favors the more aggressive institutional faction. In the United States, the generals who raised concerns about munitions stockpiles and the pace of escalation have been removed. In Iran, the figures associated with the negotiated track, who signed the MOU, who met with Omani counterparts, who presented to the Supreme Leader a deal that the Supreme Leader endorsed with documented reservations, have been surrounded by a new military command structure whose explicit mandate is offensive readiness and whose most powerful figure has been tasked with powerful offensive operations. In both cases, the institution doing the purging is the one most committed to continued confrontation. In both cases, the people removed or sidelined are the ones who raised questions about whether continued confrontation was sustainable. In the United States, that question was about munitions. In Iran, that question was about the economy. In both countries, the answer from the institutions that do the purging is the same. Keep fighting, build faster, prepare for offensive operations, and let the diplomats talk while the military commands. Whether the Oman talks survive this convergence of reshuffles, this simultaneous hardening of command posture on both sides in the same 48 hours, while the world's most important energy choke point operates at a fraction of normal capacity, and the waiting tankers offshore from Karg Island count their days, is the question that August 11th, 2026 has placed in front of everyone watching this war. The decrees were issued. The appointments are formal. The mandate says powerful offensive operations. The compensation demand has been added. The Supreme Leader has not been seen in public. The IRGC commander is wanted by Interpol. The ceasefire that briefly existed in June is gone, and the people on both sides who were trying to prevent the next phase of this conflict from being the worst phase have been, in their respective countries, removed from the rooms where the next decisions are being made.